Hello and welcome to the weekly quiz number 4. This is the series where players of all different ratings look at the exact same 3 positions and give feedback on what moves they would play and why. You guys know the drill. There are links in the description below if you'd like to participate or get in for next week's quiz. You can also just pause the video as we go along. Let's get started. All right, this week we had 1,513 players participate in the quiz. Here's the rating graph if you're interested in how the ratings are distributed. Now let's move on to the positions. All right, here's position number 1. If you'd like to pause the video and figure out what you would play for black, go ahead and do that. For everyone else who's ready to see the results, here we go. Now this is an interesting position because if you look at the material, white is just up an entire queen. There's just an extra queen sitting over here on c2. But it doesn't even matter because black has this super duper awesome battery with these 2 rooks. And there's this killer threat on g1 that white can't really deal with. Now, the correct move was actually not to play check immediately, but to play knight to f4 first. And most people actually found this. And the point is that it takes away the e2 square so the king can't get out. And now the threat rook g1 is just checkmate immediately. And even though white has this extra queen, there's really nothing they can do. The best move would be to play like bishop here to block the battery. And then after black captures, to just sacrifice the queen. Now, that's white's best chance to kind of continue to play on, but that was the idea. Now some people in the under 1,000 said rook to g1 first, and the problem with this move is that after the king goes, if you follow it up with, let's say, knight f4, now the king can run to f3, and you don't have a good way to follow up. Yes, you can take the rook, but you were already down a queen. You don't really need material, you need checkmate, and since you don't have anything, now white can kind of go on the offensive, play queen takes h7, and now black's in trouble. So that was the only solution to this position. You had to play knight to f4 first to prevent the king from going to e2. This is actually a useful thing to pay attention to for beginners. Sometimes you have the right idea, like you know which moves you should play, but you get the ordering wrong. So if you said rook to g1 check followed by knight to f4, you had the right idea. You want to bring the rook here, you want to bring the knight in, but you just had the ordering wrong. It was better to play knight here first, and then you have this. So one of the questions you want to ask yourself is, what's the best order to play these moves in if you have a couple of moves in mind? So in this position, actually for every single rating group, the top move was knight to f4. So congratulations to everyone who found that. Most of the groups, the second move was rook to g1, which we already talked about why that's not so great. And then the only other 2 moves that were really considered were, some people said bishop to f4 in this position, which is really not what you want to do because that's like the best square for your knight to go, and you've just taken that away from your bishop. Even if you can get this check in later, white just simply runs over here and you don't have any good way to follow up because that square is no longer available. So that just didn't quite cut it. Like, yes, it attacks the knight, but you're already down a queen. You need something better than that, and we already kind of looked at what that was. So bishop f4 doesn't cut it. And then the other move some people said was king to e7, which, okay, if you're maybe just trying to survive and move your king around and make a threat or something, okay, that's fine, but you're down a queen. So you need something more immediate. King e7 doesn't quite fit the bill. If we check Stockfish, knight to f4 is the only good move for black. You can see that rook g1 check and bishop f4, while they come in at 2 and 3, they're not good for black. So only move, knight f4. Here's position number 2. If you'd like to pause the video now and figure out what you would play for black, go ahead and do that. For everyone else who's ready to see the solution, here we go. Okay, so this position was a little deceiving. Now, not as many people were fooled as I thought, but when I first looked at this at a quick glance, I thought to myself, okay, it looks pretty equal, like takes, 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 takes. Didn't really see a whole lot going on. White's, has an extra pawn, but black has control of the file. Like, okay, seems pretty equal. But what actually can happen, and this was kind of the trick here, after you take the knight, which by the way was the best move, and white recaptures the queen, there's what's called an in-between move. And there's a German word for this. I'm going to probably botch the pronunciation, but it's Zwischenzug, I think is how you say it. But basically what it means is instead of playing the expected move, the move that your opponent expects you to play, you play something else first, and then you play the expected move. So in this case, what is expected of us? Well, we're going to recapture our queen that we just lost with one of these 2 rooks, right? But the Zwischenzug move that we can play is knight to d3 check. And it's actually a double check. So white doesn't have the option of capturing her knight, has to move the king. That's the only way you can get out of a double check, by the way. So let's say king d2, and now we can follow up with the expected move to recapture the queen after the Zwischenzug, and we basically just won a piece, right? Because white never got the option to recapture our knight. And so that was the point behind this position. That's what I wanted to see if people noticed. And a lot of you did a really good job of this. Actually, all the rating groups across the board, from 0 to all the way to the top move was knight takes e5. And from 0 to 1,000 and 1,000 to 1,300, the next two moves were bishop to e6 and rook to e7. Now, if you missed the double attack, well, then bishop e6 and rook e7 were the next two best moves because you're attacking the queen, you're dealing with this threat on f7, and so not a bad idea. And then same thing with rook to e7, you're also dealing with both of these threats, and so if you had to do something because you didn't see that, that's a good, alternative, but that was the best move just because you won the piece. Now, for the 13 to 1,600, 16 to 2,000, and 2,000 plus, top move was knight takes e5. That's good. Second move was bishop to e6. Okay, fine, you missed the tactic. The third move in those groups, guess what it was? It was f6. Pawn to f6, which, by the way, I'm not able to move because it's illegal. So, yeah, there's that. So this is the second quiz where we've had people suggesting an illegal move. So I don't really know what to say about that. If we check Stockfish, you can see the only good move for black was capturing on e5. Other moves were okay, but you're not going to get into an advantage like if you did this and saw the Zwischenzug in between move. Okay, here's position number 3. If you'd like to pause the video and figure out what you would play for black, go ahead and do that now. For everyone else who's ready to see the solution, here we go. So this position was very tough for black because you have your queen under attack right away. You also have lots of pieces that can potentially end up on your king. And so really tough to figure out where the best place to move this queen was. If we look at the 0 to 1,000, most players wanted to play queen to g6. And the problem with queen to g6 is that the move f5 is kind of a good looking move for white anyway, even if your queen wasn't on g6, right? Because it's attacking this pawn, which is pinned, and once you take that, it lets your rook into the game. So by now that the queen's on g6, you can not only play f5 and do that, you also have a threat on the queen, so black now has to waste another move moving the queen. So like after queen g5, you can capture here with double check, and it's not good for black. Computer seems to think that if you play king to e8, you can somehow survive, maybe with perfect play, but realistically, this is not good news for black, and there's a much better option. Now, the second move that was suggested was queen to f5, and this looks like a better alternative. This was actually a move that I considered playing myself, because you're blockading the pawn so that it can't push and let the rook in, and also put more pressure on e6. The problem with this move is that white can play the move e4, which this is a really tough move to find, because I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't even consider this as a move for white. The reason I was afraid of playing queen at f5 was g4. I thought white was going to play g4, harass my queen. If I have to maybe move back here, then f5. Again, putting pressure here. My queen's kind of stuck in the corner. Turns out, Stockfish actually doesn't mind this for black. It says black is better here, which is fascinating, I think. Like knight f6, takes, and then king e8. But going back, instead of g4, Stockfish shows how e4, and if you capture the pawn, now the move rook to e1 with the tempo on your queen, and then you've got this threat back here. So after something like queen g6, the rook can just capture, setting up this really deadly discovered check. And so you have to give up your queen, and it's just not great. And if you would have went, let's say, all the way back to h7, what's the move now? Bishop takes e6 check, king e7, and it forces you again into this discovered check, and now bishop takes, and then your queen is hanging because your king's under attack. Bad news. So that's why queen f5 was no good. Very tough move to spot. Like I said, I didn't even consider that. I was afraid of this because of g4. That's why I didn't want to play queen f5, but e4 was the move. And then if we go back, the third option was queen to h4, and this was actually the correct move. Now, this is tough to understand exactly why, but part of the reason is you're not wasting time getting your queen harassed by white's pawns. The only pawn that can harass your queen is g3, but if white does that, well then now white has to be very careful because you've opened up this diagonal for this bishop, and so after queen h3, all black has to do is move the knight, and we've got a nice little checkmate threat here. And it turns out that, yeah, Stockfish likes black's position better. So let's, for example, f5, knight to e5, there's a checkmate threat. Bishop takes king e8, and then something like queen e2 to stop the checkmate. But black just plays bishop to d6, and black actually, despite how it looked the other way, black actually is the one on the offensive now with lots of threats here that white has to be very careful of. So queen h4 was very good for that reason. And if we go back, let's say white doesn't attack, the queen and plays f5 anyway. Now you can play bishop to d6, again creating a counter threat, letting white capture here and just putting your king back on e8. And again, blacks can move this knight, unleash this bishop, already has the threat here that white has to deal with. So let's see, Stockfish is saying h3, knight e5, and black is actually going on the offensive. Black is better here. So very tough position to figure that out in, but the point was kind of not, basically not let your queen get harassed by the pawns with tempo, and start to think about creating a counterattack on white's king with your own bishops, and just kind of tuck your king back here on e8. So very tricky position. If you found queen h4, congratulations, that was not an easy one to find. And so all groups were basically saying the top moves of queen g6 and queen f5 until we got to the 2000 and above. That's when we saw the top move of queen h4. And if we check Stockfish, number one move is queen h4, and then it's been kind of jumping back and forth between queen f5 and queen e7, but those were moves 2 and 3. Right now it's time for viewers versus Stockfish. Let's see how we did this week. So this is position number 1, and a lot of people found knight f4, so congratulations, you guys actually knocked this one out of the park, with almost 65% of players finding the best move matching up with Stockfish. So really good start. Let's check position number 2. Position number 2, again, a lot of players found the right move. We had over 50%, 51.2% finding Stockfish's move. So again, congratulations. We are ahead at the moment. It's going to come down to position number 3. Drum roll, please. Let's see if we can hold on to the victory. Okay, position 3 was a tough one, and unfortunately, the percentage of us that found the correct move was only 14.2%. It pulls our average down to 43.4%. So we were super close. This is actually the best score that we've had so far. So congratulations on that. But we didn't beat Stockfish this time. All right, so I'll bring over my spreadsheet. You can see that we're 0-3 against Stockfish, but this was a very good week. 43.4% is quite an improvement. So we'll see how we do next week. Don't forget, links in the description for next week's quiz. As always, thanks for watching. Stay sharp, play smart, take care.